Well, I'm glad to be here, and what I'm going to be talking about tonight is Native American rock art and its connection with the eclipse and possible connection. And then also I'm going to be talking, the second part of my talk is on a really famous prediction that the Shawnee Prophet made in 1806, when he predicted that the eclipse would happen, and it did happen. And that talk is going to be about just how that all played out, and did he actually predict it, and why? How did he know? How did he know? And part of that is, if you look on the left image up there, there's an archaeologist working in Missouri, and he's actually given a talk at Cahokia on this topic, upcoming. I can't tell you exactly what day, because he's my competition. I don't want you going to hear him. But that image is from him, and he is tracking past eclipses in the 800s, 900s with rock art sites. And he thinks that there is a correlation between where rock art sites are located and where the path of the eclipse came across. And he may be right to some extent. And then on the right is a poster we did in 2017 and for the last eclipse. And to make that poster, my wife, who is back here, worked with a Shawnee man named George Blanchard, and he is the last Shawnee who grew up in a traditional household. And he only spoke Shawnee as a child until he went to grade school. And so he is kind of the Shawnee authority on what different words mean. And we asked him for the word eclipse in Shawnee, and he said there is no word for eclipse. So that tells you that it's kind of pretty infrequent. But what he came up with is the title up there. It's hard to see. I think it says, in the shadow, standing in the shadow of the moon. And that is what he came up with for eclipse in Shawnee. So it's not a one-to-one. It's kind of almost like a metaphor for what it would have been. Oh, I hope we're going to go ahead. Let's try this. Okay, we have this is the image that was done for the last one, 2017, and shows the path of the eclipse across our area, across southern Illinois and part of Kentucky. But what I like about this they show the phases of the eclipse at the top, approaching totality and then coming out of totality. And you get shapes like crescent shapes. In the center, you get at the height of the eclipse, where you get the corona around it. And I'm going to talk about how those relate to rock art images that we see. And here we are for 2024. And again, the same thing is going to be happening. It's pretty amazing that we're at the intersection of two different eclipses and that we don't have to travel to see them. And this is something that may have actually been influenced by the eclipse. It's kind of hard to see, but there's our poster in the left. And then up at the top, you get the eclipse in totality. And at the bottom right, you get a Mississippian art shell gorget that somebody would have worn on their chest. And it's hard to see, but there's a cross and circle in the center that has rays coming out of it. And there's some suggestion that may be the eclipse at totality. So in this case, they're actually portraying something they saw, or that is art that's a memory of the event that happened. And this is 2017 in Southern Illinois. Carbondale, where I'm from and where I teach, thought this was going to be a gold mine for them, that everybody in the country was going to flock to Carbondale. And it turned out a lot of people did come to Carbondale, but a lot of people just were spread out along the landscape. And so people were camping. You could see it anywhere from the side of the road, but you didn't have to be in Carbondale. Don't tell them I said that, because they think the same thing's going to happen this year. And I actually was at a winery south of Carbondale, down in Union County, and it just shows you, these are images I took as it was occurring. And we lucked out. There were high clouds when we got there, and it could have been, those high clouds could have drifted across the sun and the whole thing would have been ruined. But as you went along, the high clouds dissipated, and at the very end, we're in totality and what it looked like when the eclipse was occurring in the middle of the day. And it's a good place to go. If you need a place to go, that's a place to go. You get a great view of the sky. But the other thing about that, at least in southern Illinois, was it was real iffy. At SIU, they were charging people to go sit in the football stadium, and they had a lot of entertainment for them and all that. And people paid a lot of money to go sit in that football stadium, and they're in there in the stadium, and a cloud drifted across right when the eclipse happened. And they got to see the very tail end of it. So it's not, sitting in the football stadium, it's not a guarantee you're going to see it. And here we have images in southern Illinois. We have over 100 rock art sites, at least. And they're not all big sites. And they're scattered across the landscape. And some of them are definite celestial images. They're images of stars. They're images of the sun. They're crescent shapes. It can be the moon. And the question is, are they really eclipse images, or are they not? Or are they something else? And this again is from the archaeologist in Missouri, Rusty Wiseman. He is the man who's going to be talking at Cahokia shortly. I don't know the exact date, probably within the next couple weekends. And that shape in particular is the one that Rusty talks about. And that's a shape we see on late prehistoric art, on Mississippian art. And it's called an OG. It's like a circle that has a tail at either end. And his interpretation is that this is the eclipse in totality. Is that's what is being portrayed. That's where that image originates from. And it may not be that, you know, the image goes on for a couple hundred years, but that may be its genesis, is that it was something they saw during the eclipse which would have had a really profound effect. And these are examples of that same image at a number of different sites. Where you see it and it's white, those are old photographs where somebody chalked it in, which is a bad thing. You don't have to do that. You can, if you're a good photographer, you don't have to chalk things in. And actually chalking it in damages those, damages the images. It can get, if they've got paint still inside the carvings, it'll get chalk mixed in with the paint. So you're actually damaging it. But you can see there's about 4 of them on there. And they're all that same image being repeated over and over again. And so then we get into this. And this is Rusty's interpretation, is that what you're actually seeing, that shape, and when you look at it, it is pretty striking that when you can see, watch totality, you'll see this light come out at the top and the bottom. And it looks an awful lot like those images that we see in Mississippian rock art. And I was kind of skeptical of his interpretation until I saw the eclipse. And I saw that image down at the bottom, and then I was like, oh, he might be right. He might be right. That might be what is being portrayed on the rock. And we also see it here. I think there's supposed to be another image here which has disappeared. But this is a figure from Oklahoma, from a Mississippian site called the Spiro site. And this is a religious figure. We actually think we know what his name was. He's a mythological being. His name is He Who Wears Human Heads for Earrings. But if you look at his hat, he's got that same image is carved on his top of the hat or cap that he's wearing. So there's a very definite association of that image with religion and power. Oh, and there we go. Just a little slow. But again, if you look at the cap he's wearing, you look at the image at the left, that is what we're talking about. And then here's where the eclipse ran across in 831. And you can see it's sweeping down from the north. And it's hitting our area, it's hitting Kentucky, hitting Illinois. So Native American peoples in this area would have seen it. And then there's the one in 941 that is coming in from the southeast. And again, it goes across our area. So Native American peoples living here would have seen it. And they lacked the knowledge to predict it. So it would have been an amazing thing to be alive during that time. And all of a sudden you see the sun starting to disappear and you wonder whether it's going to come back. So it would have had a really profound effect on Native Americans. And one thing we know about Native American societies is that religion runs very deep and prophecy runs very deep. And seeing this sort of event may have spurred a religious revival, may have spurred the rise of a prophet who is going to claim power from the eclipse. And this again is Rusty's, one of his correlations of rock art with the path of the eclipse. And every one of those push pins represents an eclipse site. And you can see most of them are clustered inside the path of the eclipse. But is that what we're tracking? I think this is what we might be tracking. We might be tracking the Shawnee Hills and the Ozark Hills. And these are the best locations for the creation of rock art. You get up out of that area and there's no rock, there's no land, no rock, all the way to Chicago. So what you're really tracking is the location of rock that's suitable for the creation of rock art. Doesn't mean that people farther north didn't share those same religious beliefs or create those same images. They just didn't have rock to carve them on or paint them on. And this is one of the sites. This is called the painting site, and it is located overlooking the Mississippi River. Let's see if we have a pointer here. Oh, I got a light that lights up. Well, anyway, if you're standing down in the floodplain, these images are about 200 feet above your head, and they are so big that if you know where they are, they're probably about 1,000 years old, you can still see them. They have faded, but they're still visible, and they are being damaged. If you look at the very bottom, the painted surface is starting to flake off the rock surface. But this is after 1,000 years that is happening. And the images they've got up there on the right, they've got a thunderbird. They've got two human figures who are standing on either side of this image, this OG image, which might be an eclipse. Again, it's that big shape, big kind of elliptical shape. But the other thing about this site, when you get up there, is you have to climb up to this little ledge. You have to go 200 feet up the side of the bluff. And it's not vertical, but it's pretty steep. And when you get up there, you're on this little ledge. And there are additional paintings that are out there that are not visible from the road. And in the lower right, I've got those are my fingers. I'm kind of bracketing a painting of what is a war club. It's got over my left hand, you can see the head of the war club. But the striking thing when you're up there are all these little caves and niches that go into the rock face. And the insides of them are painted. But they're all empty. There's nothing in them. But if you go all the way to the top of the bluff, there are burial mounds on the top of the bluff. And I think my interpretation is that these are like the pyramids in Egypt. They're places where burials once were. And people were being put into those niches as part of processing, possibly to let them decay. And then their bones are being gathered up and being moved up to the top of the bluff as part of a process. And this is one of the indications that something like that is going on. There are all these little images up there. They're not visible from the road. They're like human bird-like figures. That one at the upper right is an avomorph. All that means is a bird-like figure. It's part human. It looks like human, but it's got wings. Think of an angel. It's an upper world image. And at the bottom, lower right, is a spread-winged bird. There's also a prairie chicken, I think, to the left. And these are all surrounding these little, these cavities in the rock. So it tells you that people are climbing up there. And maybe the big images that you see from the ground key them into where these are, and they know where it is. And then they go up and they conduct ceremonies associated with those cavities. And I think it's probably processing of dead people, putting them in there, and then moving them up to the top. And these little images that you can't see from the road are created as part of that. So they're really not solstice type images. And this is a site that called Fountain Bluff. It's one of our major sites, and you can kind of see it in the bottom lower right. And then there's a map of it above it, and you can kind of make it out on the left over there. And Fountain Bluff is a 3-mile long section of the ridge that just juts up out of the Mississippi River floodplain. And it contains, and around it are contained, probably the most rock art sites in all of Illinois are located around Fountain Bluff. And the reason for that is that there are major prehistoric villages. All this area north of the bluff was a big wetlands, and there is a big middle woodland or a 2,000-year-old village there that's out there, and then the Mississippians are out there later, and you get burial mounds out there. And so all of this, Fountain Bluff is part of what we would call a sacred landscape. And people who are living in these villages are incorporating that bluff into what they're doing, and they're going up there and they're burying people on top of the bluff. We know they're doing that. They're burying them in rock shelters up there, and they're also creating a lot of rock art up there. And so, and again, we see that same image again of an OG is there. And these are just examples of some of the sites. The one up at the upper right has got an OG on it. You can barely make it. I think it's up at the upper right. But it's got a lot of other images on it too. And this is where you start getting into trouble interpreting these things as solstice sites. Some of those images on that rock are several thousand years old. They predate the eclipses by a couple thousand years. And at the very end, one of the last images to be carved on there is that OG, or if it's an eclipse representation, is one of the very last images. So these are like sites you get in Europe, Stonehenge. You've got other stone circles in Europe, Western Europe, that function as religious sites for thousands of years, and people keep coming back. Different people keep coming back. Later groups see this rock art, and they know they didn't create it, but they know it's important. And they will then come in and create additional images. And that's what you see in that upper right. It's a composite of 2,000-year-old images and more recent images. And probably the later Mississippian peoples saw those images and recognized it as a religious location, as a place of power. And so they're interacting with it and drawing power from it by creating their own images. And then this is one of our, I showed you an example of a war club at that site on the bluffs. This rock also contains one of those. It's one of our only, I think it might be our only known carving of a war club in Southern Illinois. And these are carried in the hands of mythical figures also. So it may not be an indication of war, but it's an indication of this mythical figure who carries that club in his hand. And this again is just Fountain Bluff and what the environment looks like. When you're up there, and those two lower left photos are taken up by where the rock art site is, you get this tremendous view of the Mississippi River Valley, and you can see forever down out there. And this is the big site. It's located on the Shawnee National Forest. And it contains probably a couple hundred images, both carved and painted. It's been damaged over the years. A lot of people know about it. They go up there. We wish they wouldn't go up there because just being up there causes damage to it. People touch the images. They walk on them because they don't recognize them. And I've seen damage occur to things up there from people just being careless up there. But you can see the distribution of the images going along this one wall. And here again is this. This is one of the images that we see up there. Again, the question becomes, is this really an eclipse representation, or is it something else? It may be an eclipse representation, but all these other images are 2,000 to 3,000 years old. Human hands, animal tracks are very old. They go back 2,000 to 3,000 years. They do not occur. They're not contemporary with that OG image. They date before it. So what you get again, you get a location that people have been visiting for a couple thousand years. We know there were burials in the floor of that shelter at one time. People were buried in it. They were dug out by, we don't know by who, probably in the 1940s, 1950s. So it is a sacred site again. People are going up there to do rituals. They're going up there to bury their dead. And they're going up there for a couple thousand years. And when they get up there, they see this earlier, I call it rock art, but you could call it religious art. They see this earlier religious art, and it just reinforces to them the sacredness of the place. And then they create their own art while they're up there as part of ceremonies. And this is one example we have as an indication we know that's going on. On the right, there is, you can see, it's a sun symbol. It's a cross in a circle, which represents the cosmos, represents the universe. And we know that's a late image that we don't see until about, maybe until about 800 AD, that image doesn't appear. But it is carved through. You see all those grooves that are running out of it. It almost looks like tail feathers that are running down. Those are some of the earliest rock art up there, and this thing is carved on top of them. It is not the same age, so it is by the last people coming up there, and they're carving it right through these earlier images. So it lets us know that this art is a composite, or it's an aggregation of designs. It's not all one thing up there. And when we were up there probably about 15 years ago, one of our problems is that a lot of rock art is not dateable. You cannot date it without damaging it. You can date charcoal paintings through radiocarbon dating, but to do that, you have to destroy part of them. And if they're religious images, you don't want to do that. And Native Americans would be really, really offended if you were doing that, because to them, these sites are still sacred sites and they're still alive. And so what we did was we dug a couple of little holes on the edge of the shelter because somebody had dug the floor up decades ago and there was nothing to find there. And we did get some things that let us know how old the site was. And we recovered tools that went back several thousand years. We recovered tools and ceramics from about 2,000 years ago. And then these things at the bottom that are red slips, those are Mississippian ceramics. So we were getting evidence that people were going up there for a very long time. And this is another one of the sites that has that Eclipse or OG image in it. It is Bay Creek Rock Shelter. It's very far away from that other site. It is over in Pope County, which is located on the Ohio River. And it's a very low shelter. But surprisingly for the shelter just doesn't contain that much inside of archaeology. I mean, in terms of artifacts, but people were going in there and creating rock art again for some reason. And a technique we have now that we didn't have, let's say, 30 years ago is something called de-stretch, which is an enhancement you can get for your camera. It's an app I have it on my phone. You can get de-stretch from the Apple Store, load it on your phone, and when you go out to these very faded sites, it'll run those images through a number of different settings, and things that look very faint and you can't make out what they are, they will become vivid and de-stretch and you can see them. So you don't have to damage them, you don't have to hurt them. So it's used all around the world. It's made a real revolution in rock art studies. Oops. Well, I can see something, you can't see it, luckily. That was from my notes. Here we go. These are the paintings that are on the ceiling. If you look up in the upper top left, there is that image again. Again, is it an eclipse image? But you see other things out there as well. You see what looks like in the middle on the right is a quadruped or a four-legged animal that is either a deer or a dog. I think it's most likely that it's a deer. And in the lower left, there is an image that looks like a turtle. It looks more like a turtle if you're out there. Not too much in that slide. And this is putting those images into de-stretch in the lower right. On the left, Heather Carey, who is the Forest Service archaeologist, is pointing at this wall that's covered with paintings. And this is them in the lower right. When you can see them, you can look up in the upper top right, all you can see is that red ball. And then you look in the lower bottom, you can see all these other images that are there. And it turns out that that ball is, again, an OG type image. It's got a tail coming down to the bottom. So they do have that same representation in this site. But they've got a lot of other things too. And this is another good example. This is an image that we could see on the ceiling and we could not make out what it was. And we put it into D-stretch and it shows up in this image at the right as a crescent. And the question is, are we looking at a celestial image? Are we looking at the moon? Or are we looking at something else? And if you look at it, it's hard to see. It's got projections coming out from the bottom. You can see there are two things projecting backwards that look like horns. And there is a mythical beast in Native American religion known as the horned serpent. And the horned serpent is a very powerful, very dangerous creature. So this could be a moon. It could also be the horned serpent. I don't know if that top was supposed to be up there, but it is now. These are some sites over in Union County. And the one I wanted to show you is the little star image is in the bottom right. And this is a site called Draper's Bluff. It's owned or was owned by a guy named Eric Ulner. And he was the big rock climbing guru in Southern Illinois. And he actually operated his Draper's Bluff as a location where you could go rock climbing and go rappelling down the side of it. And he did that for a number of years. And he wanted to take me up there one day. There's a prehistoric site on the very top of Draper's Bluff. And he wanted to take me up there. And he had been climbing up and down this bluff for 20 years. And on the way we were climbing up, on the lower right, I saw that little image there. And I wish I had that in D-stretch. It's that little rayed image. It's a star. And he had never seen that in 20 years of climbing up there. And he was really amazed that I had seen it. And you can see how small it is. There's a lens cap was laying above it. And somebody has written their name in chalk. Or somebody saw it, obviously, and wrote their initials, HB, over top of it. But this is kind of an example of how much stuff is out there that we don't even know about. But again, you know, you get this star image, and what does it mean? Native Americans watch the night sky a lot. And these are other star images. A very similar one at a little rock shoulder in Union County in the lower right. And you go in, and I think that's the only image in there, and somebody has painted a star. These paintings are made with iron ore, and that's how you can tell that they're Native American. They're grinding up iron ore and mixing it with water, and that appears to be the paint recipe for, at least for Southern Illinois. Other parts of the Southeast have different paint recipes. Ours is primarily just grinding up hematite. Hopefully they didn't grind up the rock art. Grind up the hematite, mix it with water, and you can make a red paint, and they're painting that on the rock face. And sometimes you get gypsum mixed in with it. And gypsum is something that's used in stucco. So gypsum may be getting mixed in to help those paintings adhere to the rock face. And this again is going back to Fountain Bluff. And this is the lower site. This is a site at the very bottom. And it is one of our oldest sites. It contains numerous images, big images of birds, all sorts of things. But it contains the one image that, if you're talking about an eclipse, it's about one of the few sites that I think really might have an eclipse image at it. And that's this. That's this little carving. You get a crescent and a circle. And what that may be is an eclipse with the sun emerging from totality. That's the way it looks. You'll see the sun coming out with a crescent around it. Again, it may be something else, but if we had a candidate for being an eclipse image, that would be the closest one I could think of. And this is what I'm talking about. When you look at this and you get this crescent shape. So it could be a moon in the planet. It could be, there is a Native American myth about the evening star, which is Venus and the North Star. It could be that. You got an association of a crescent with what looks like a planet. Or it could be this. It could be that they're actually showing you the eclipse. I imagine if you saw it, And if you were a Native American and you didn't know what it was, and the sun disappeared for a couple minutes, that would have had a profound impact on you. And then I wanted to show you this one. This is an indication that not all of our images can be related to the eclipse. This is Buffalo Rock that's on the Shawnee. And we think the paintings there were created around AD 1700 by Native Americans who were engaged in buffalo hunting. There was a Frenchman who came down in the early 1700s from Canada. I'm trying to blink it out. Juchereau de Saint-Denis. He was a royal judge of Montreal, had a license to hunt bison in the lower Ohio, and he brought Mascouten Indians down with him to hunt bison for him. And this was a big operation. And they killed hundreds or thousands of bisons. And what happened was, and this is this site, Buffalo Rock. It's on a major east-west road that probably goes back into prehistory, a trail. I call it a road. But the trail would have linked, I think it links Golconda in the east with Kaskaskia in the west. And when you go out there, you see a painting of a bison on the one wall. And that was the only painting that people knew of for about, 100 years. And then about 20 years ago, in that dark area, we discovered the paintings of a moon and a star in there that no one had ever reported before. And this is the bison. And he had to be digitally enhanced by a very good photographer who was able to bring him out. And he won't look like this if you go out there. You'll wonder if we even knew what we were talking about when you go look at this, because that painting is so faded. And we do get some indication of when bison come into southern Illinois. They're not here prehistorically. We've excavated hundreds, well, I won't say hundreds, let's say over 100 sites that we have animal bones from that they have eaten. You never, ever, ever get a bison bone until the 1600s. Bison come into southern Illinois, come into Illinois very late. And this is a bison bone from Kaskaskia Indian Village on the Mississippi, Randolph County, right bordering Missouri. And if you go back to Buffalo Rock, it's a very similar image. They're showing that bison in profile. If you showed him front on, you could never see what he was. Showing a quadruped or a four-legged animal in profile, you can tell what they're supposed to be. And that's a Kaskaskia Indian from the 1790s to the right. So anyway, we think that this is probably the age range for this thing. And why buffalo weren't here earlier? There is evidence from northern Illinois that they were coming in as far as 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. But as fast as they come in, the Indians kill them. The Indian population in Illinois is so high that the bison cannot cross into Illinois without being killed. And there is a great migration or die-off of peoples following the discovery of North America by Columbus. We don't know what causes it. We don't know if it's disease or if it's just shock waves are moving through these different Indian groups as a result of the Spanish expeditions, and people were moving all over the place. Part of that Illinois gets abandoned. We don't know where the people go. We think some of them came here to Kentucky. There are some very late Mississippian sites in Kentucky. But what that means is there's nobody left to kill the bison anymore. And so all of a sudden, for the first time, the bison are coming across in large numbers into Illinois, and the Kaskaskia are actually killing them. And we have accounts of them actually hunting and killing bison, and that is a bison bone artifact with a bison carved on it. So it's an indication that Buffalo Rock in this bison painting are not prehistoric, that they are, it's historic period. And there it is, the way it appears, and there it is enhanced. And we know it's a Native American painting because we did something called a PXRF analysis. I wish I had another photo. A PXRF instrument looks like a policeman's radar gun, and you can see it there on the end of its arm. It is pointed at the head of the bison, and it does not damage the painting. it sends an X-ray signal into the painting, and it can give you information on the elemental composition of the painting. If you look at the top, one of those columns, you'll see Fe for iron. The greatest constituent of that painting is iron. It means that it's an iron oxide painting. It means it's a Native American painting, that they are crushing up, just like the prehistoric Indians, they are crushing up hematite and making it into a paint. So we know it's a Native American painting. But when you look inside of it, you get these two images again, and they're hard to see. On the left, you get a crescent shape again, and on the right, you get something that looks like a star. But in this case, we know they cannot be eclipse images. If all that art out there dates to the 1700s or later, they cannot be eclipse images. They're very late images. And this is what they look like when they're cleaned up. But again, when you look at the eclipse, the phases of the eclipse, yeah, you get that crescent shape again. So is this a moon, or is it a phase of the eclipse? In this case, I would say it's the moon. It is not, or it's a planet going through a phase. And again, they cannot be. It cannot be related to the eclipse unless the images are created at different times. In this case, I do not think they are. And the Native Americans do have myths about the morning star, which is Venus, and the North Star, which is kind of what you're seeing in that depiction up there. And, so those images, that may be what they're indicating is a completely different myth altogether. And now I was going to talk to you about the Shawnee Prophet and his famous prediction of the eclipse in 1806. And he actually predicted the 1806 eclipse. And eclipses are so infrequent, the question is, how did he know? I mean, it's something that may occur in somebody's lifetime once. They may come a couple hundred years apart. So how did he know that it was going to occur? And that's him on the left. And he rises to prominence in the early 1800s. But Native American prophecy runs very deep. We know there are prophets before him and prophets after him. He is just the major prophet during the War of 1812, and he comes his brother. And what is going on during this time period is all through the 1700s, there's a relationship between Europeans and Indians in Illinois in the Midwest. It's called the Middle Ground, where Indians and Europeans are meeting as equals. They're trading, they have diplomatic relationships, but the Europeans cannot take over. They are not there in enough numbers to take over Native American territory. So they are forced to deal with Native Americans as equals, and that's why it's called the Middle Ground. And the other thing they do in the bottom right is they engage in the fur trade with Europeans. And this isn't a destruction of their culture. They're adding things to their culture that they want. They're very selective of what they want. They're taking certain things, and this shows people at a fur trader's operation where they are bringing in hides, and in return, he's giving them guns, he's giving them cloth, he's giving them metal kettles. The thing they really want out of the fur trade is cloth, which gives you an idea how unpleasant wearing hides all the time might be. There have been some suggestion that the fur trade should really be called the cloth trade, because we're kind of deceived, because as archaeologists we find gun parts, we find axe parts, we find kettle parts. We don't find the cloth, it's all gone. But if you look at the fur trade records, you'll see in value, it's almost a one-to-one trade of furs for cloth, and cloth is what they're really after. But anyway, all this starts to break down in the late 1700s, and the reason for that is the rise of the American Republic. The United States is expanding into Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, and what results is what they call the 20 Years' War for the Old Northwest. There is almost continuous fighting going on in different areas between the Native American Confederacy and United States soldiers, United States settlers, and it ends disastrously for the Native Americans. In 1794, they're forced to sign a treaty ceding all of Ohio to the United States. And this is a disastrous defeat. And what happens is they don't understand why things are going so bad. They interpret it in terms of they've lost God's favor, and they've lost spiritual power. And so their villages are, and this is true, their villages are really ridden with alcoholism and despair because they just don't understand why they can't win and why they're losing everywhere. And so what happens is prophets arise. And he is the most famous. There are several others at the same time, but he is the most famous of them, Tezcatlipoca, Tecumseh's brother. And the United States government is worried about him several years before they're worried about Tecumseh. You see his name first appear in letters and diplomatic treaty meetings, and they're talking about him as the threat because he is telling all the Native American peoples, you know, we can resist through religion. The problem is you have fallen away from old ways. And if you go back to the old ways and you give up all this stuff in dealing with Europeans or dealing with Americans, God is going to return favor to us. God will be on our side and we are going to win. And so this had a tremendous impact on Native Americans. And, you know, because it was, he traveled all through the Midwest and the Southeast and probably talked to probably tens of thousands of Native Americans. And accounts from that time period document what a dramatic effect he had on people. And these are some of his rules. Basically, he's calling for the complete separation of Americans or Europeans and Indians. And he's saying, we got to get back to the old ways. We got to quit doing all this stuff we're doing. And he's giving you an example in the upper right. He's wearing that outfit of a prophet. He's got his prayer sticks in his hand. He's got sacred beads around his hands. He's got these sacred feathers going through his ears up there. And he's wearing a hide, an animal hide over his shoulders, which is the sign of a prophet. And he's telling all his people, you know, don't eat cows, don't eat pigs, don't farm like white people, don't live in a log cabin, don't eat off of dishes. You've got to go back to living like an Indian. And if you do this, God will return favor to us. God will be on our side once again and we'll win. So this has a tremendous effect on Native Americans. And what happens is that William Henry Harrison, who's the governor of Indiana Territory, who identifies him as a threat, and the prophet is showing up at treaty meetings and he's causing a great deal of disturbance and they're very concerned about him. And Harrison dares the prophet. He says, if you're such a great religious man, if you're such a great prophet, do something astounding. Show us something that is evidence of your power. And the prophet responded by predicting the eclipse of 1806. But how did he know this? How did he know it was really going to happen? And the reason for that is that, these are some accounts. The first account we get of the fact that he predicted the eclipse is in a book by Daniel Drake in 1841. And he is interviewing a man named Antoine Leclerc, who is a fur trader who knew the prophet and Tecumseh. And Leclerc is saying, I heard this story. I was there. I heard it when he made this prophecy. And so we have some evidence that he actually did it. But this again is, how did he know? Europeans could not predict. The first person to predict an eclipse was Edmund Halley in 1715. Before that, Europeans were in the dark as to when the next eclipse was going to come. They had no idea. So it took them till 1715. And you get Native American groups like the Shawnee and people like that, the other groups in the eastern woodlands. And they just do not have this sophisticated knowledge of astronomy. They can predict things like the summer solstice, the winter solstice. They know how to predict that, and we know they're very interested in the sky and in watching the sky, but they lack the mathematical knowledge how to predict an eclipse. So how did the prophet know this was going to happen? And this is how he may have known. I'm going to give you two alternatives. This is one alternative, how he could have known. The gazetteers were widespread. You think of the Farmer's Almanac. They were widespread on the frontier. They would have been widespread in Illinois. You could go into any store and you could probably buy the Farmer's Almanac. It contains all the information about the upcoming eclipse in it, where it's going to occur, what time, how long, all of this. And this is Ming's 1806 Almanac. And so the prophet, he himself was illiterate, but if he knew anybody who could read, and he probably did know people who could read, they could pass on this information to him about when the eclipse was going to happen. He still had to make the prediction, which would have been a pretty daring prediction because for all he knows, it's not going to happen. But he went ahead and did it, and it happened. And Native Americans, again, view spiritual power as something that can be gained or lost through ritual, through correct rituals. You can lose it through inappropriate behavior. That the prophet made such a daring prediction, and it came through it did the opposite of what William Henry Harrison wanted. It was a bad thing for William Henry Harrison that he made that dare to the prophet, and that the prophet went ahead and predicted it, and it came through. It made him even more powerful that he had predicted this event. Oh, let's go back to this for a second. The other possibility, either he knew about it through something that somebody had read to him and somebody had told him. And the other possibility is that he had spiritual power, that he actually did have some sort of knowledge somehow that enabled him to predict this. And I have a friend who works with rock art in Tennessee, and he is a very hard-headed, very scientific person. Things have to be just so. You can't make up a story. But he goes to rock art sites with Cherokee and other Native Americans, and he says they can be spooky when you're with them. And the things they say, things they do. So he is kind of like, yeah, maybe there's something there. I took, about 20 years ago, I was out with a Native American elder from Canada, from the Magenawan First Nation. And he was down visiting Southern Illinois, and I took him out to rock art sites. And he kind of freaked me out because he was a little guy about like this and a very nerdy looking guy. We went out to rock art sites and he got big. And there was some sort of transformation that went on. He did not look like the same person. And he was interacting with that rock art site. And to him, all those rock art sites are still religious. And they're still alive. They still speak to him. And so he somehow was getting some sort of religious reaction from him. And I can't explain what I saw, but I do have photo before and after. I should have brought them in to show you. I do have before and after slides I took of him. And he kind of freaked me out. That was spooky. And so the other possibility is that somehow the prophet, to those of us who've got a religious bent, somehow the prophet actually knew that this was going to happen, or he had the power to do it. And so that's it.